All right, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. How is everyone? I know last week was intense, and I know that a lot of people were disappointed with me, with the statement that I released. And the thing that people seemed most upset about was this comment I made at the end when I said he would always be my friend. And all I can say is I misspoke. I was experiencing some grief in that moment. I was feeling the loss of something that was once cherished. And I just didn't find the right words. I said the wrong thing. It was a mistake to say that. And maybe I could have gone back and tried to edit that out. I don't know. I certainly didn't have enough time to record something else. There was a lot of pressure on me to be making a statement, and I didn't feel like I could take more time. And as I mentioned, I did get the form. You can go online and download a template for how you're supposed to do this, where you list all the things that you've done and then all the things you're going to do. And I did it. I filled it out, and I was going to read it, as I said, and then it just felt like bullshit. It felt like a PR thing that institutions do to cover their ass. And it felt like the exact opposite of what this show is. So instead, I put out a statement that was deeply flawed. It was deeply flawed. Because I can't be transparent and share the process of what I'm going through and also be crafted and polished and perfectly right at the same time. And speaking of the flaws in the statement, the other thing was that people felt that it wasn't right for me to mention that I extended an invitation to Christy to come on the show, that was an intimidation. And I am really sorry about that, because I didn't think of that. I didn't think of that when I said it. I was trying to give her the platform. I wanted her to have the same platform that I gave him. But I can see now in retrospect how that was not the right thing to say. Fortunately, Christy didn't take it that way. I don't know that people listening would have gone to the website to see the comment that she left. I don't know that the people who were on the website actually saw her remarks. But I was so grateful to her for being understanding. It seemed like she could see what I was trying to do, even though I didn't do that great of a job. And she said something about wanting to continue the conversation and change the narrative, which I really appreciated. Because I, after posting, went on Facebook and read some of the comment threads and what people are writing about me, and I was so blown away. I mean, it seems like the thing that people were really upset with me for is this idea that I knew all this time and I never said anything, even while I was challenging people on this show over power abuses and other traditions. And I want to be very clear with everyone that I did not know what was in that article back then. If I had known what was in that article back then, it would have been a completely different story. I knew something, but I didn't know what was in that article. And I did take some steps. But if I had named Mark, I would have had to also name Christy. And it wasn't my place to make that choice. Now, I've written a blog where I'm laying out exactly what I knew, when, what I did, what I didn't do, and why. And for anybody who's interested, that should probably be posted on the website right now. If it's not there now, it should be there shortly. But just to be very clear, I did not know what was in that article until that article came out. And the other thing that people were saying was that they didn't think I should have released that statement, that statement should have been for me and my therapist. And some people said, you should get a therapist on to psychoanalyze you. And you know what? I think that's a fantastic idea, to get some professionals on here to have these conversations with me, check me. I'm very happy for that, and I'm already working on it. But the whole point of this show for me is to be transparent and share the process of me making mistakes. Like, let you hear me make mistakes, let you hear me learn from them. Because I don't think that a somewhat coerced and carefully crafted statement is really going to keep any of us safer. It's messy and it's gray and it needs to be unpacked. And that is what I'm going to continue doing in the conversations on this show for these issues around power abuse and every other topic that we might cover. Thank you to everybody for participating in this with me. Those of you who were supportive, and even more so to those of you who were not supportive of me. I really do think that we're going to all need to have some tough conversations about this. So I'm game if you're game. So with that, we are going to hear a conversation today with Nikki Vilella. And as you will hear, Nikki is not afraid of having a tough conversation. She came up in a recent episode with Alex O'Dare, and it seemed only right that she have an opportunity to come on and speak for herself. We cover a wide range of stuff, but we also do touch on some of the issues that have been most pressing of late. I'm glad for you to hear it today. I will touch base with you on the other side about another thing or two, but let's just get straight to it and listen to this conversation that I had with Nikki Vilella. Hello? Are you there?
Hi.
There you are.
This is the story of my life.
Well, sometimes the tech gods must be appeased.
It worked. I don't know how it worked, but it worked. Here I am.
There you go. There you go. Well, it's us old timers who remember before the internet, you know?
I know. I remember my first internet experience, actually.
Really? What was it?
I went to college, and it, email was just sort of coming around, and I had an email address, and one of my first assignments was go to the library and go on the World Wide Web, and I was terrified to put in www dot whatever. I was terrified. It was really a weird, scary moment of what's the internet? I was so used to getting the encyclopedia.
I know.
Off the shelf.
I know. I had an AOL account.
Oh, Jay, I still have an AOL account.
I know. That's what I mean. You see?
Listen, I just stopped paying for it a few years ago because somebody told me no one is paying for that, and I still have it because I'm a creature of habit apparently, and I don't even know why I have it, but I have it.
Old habits die hard.
Oh yeah. That's a good segue into our conversation.
Yeah, that's funny. Well, it's just so everybody else clues into what you were just referencing. I'm sure you heard my conversation with Alex recently. Mm-hmm. And we referenced you. We talked about you some.
Yeah.
And do you remember that panel discussion that I mentioned? That was, I believe, hosted by Yoga City.
Yes, with Brett Popper,
yes,
who is the moderator. I do totally remember, and this is so ironic and funny, but I know you're not really on social media anymore, you said, but on Facebook, it will pop up and say 5 years ago today, this was your memory,
right.
It sort of prompts you to reshare your memory or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the memory they showed me, was of us sitting on the panel. And I actually had a cringe moment of ooh, what did I say 5 years ago? And I felt like a weird, politician in the race for the presidential, like, what did you do, 20 years ago?
That tweet you sent 5 years ago or whatever. Yeah. But it's interesting to hear you say that, because that is what I was thinking as well, is that even in the last 5 years, the conversation has changed drastically.
Totally. Absolutely. It's really changed. And and it's important to me to preface this whole conversation with, I'm open to the conversation, because I think when there's these hard lines of just, well, this is what I was taught and this is what I do and this is who I am. And there's never, you guys talked about the bubble with Alex, and if there's never any check-in with anybody or the culture of what's going on, then it doesn't work. So, I have opinions and I am who I am and I teach what I teach, but I think it's really important for everybody, including myself, to just say, like, this is the culture, this is a conversation, and to be part of the conversation.
Well, I appreciate that so much. I appreciate you giving me this time and having this talk with me, and Alex put us up to it. And I figure like if you can hang with Alex, then you can hang with anybody, I don't know. She doesn't want to take any bullshit from people. So
I know. I can kind of hang with anybody. I don't know. I'm actually interested in what your perception, we don't know each other, for everybody listening to this. I totally don't know, Jay, you don't have to answer this, but just kind of the perception of who I am or what I'm doing, or,
I don't have a perception of you personally, because I don't know you at all. What I would say is that, like, Kula yoga, and sometimes like the Kula way of doing things, or like the Kula style, Kula flows, you guys do have a bit of a signature.
Yeah.
And, Skylar was on a while back.
Yeah, I listened to it. I loved that podcast, actually. I loved it. It was beautiful. It's great.
Me too. She's a great person, so it was easy to connect with her. And she was just, like, really forthcoming about stuff, about numbers and stuff, which I always appreciate when people are that transparent.
Don't let me forget. I want to talk about.
We'll get
New York City rent.
Because I'm saying, DJ's closing down. I don't know if it happened yet, but in like the next few days or something, it's gone.
It hasn't happened yet, but it's happening, and there's close. Like things happening in Williamsburg. We'll talk about it, but anyway.
Yeah, but that's what that's what I'm sort of saying, is that you are someone like Alex and me and Skylar, who were in that kind of early time in New York when things were really just starting to develop.
Yeah, and I would say that I feel like I'm in this, not just me, but in this unique area where I was after all of you. I mean, I started practicing in 2001 or 2, sometime around 9/11, I sort of remember starting to practice. So I wasn't around in the I mean, I was in New York, but I wasn't doing yoga. So like the 1990s at Jivamukti, I was not a part of that scene at all.
I see.
So I'm a little after you guys.
I get that. So you were like 3-4 years after, really, or like when did you meet Skylar?
I moved downtown to not the financial district, but to Tribeca, because they were offering money to move there. And
that's right. What was that weird program? I remember that.
Yeah. Hopefully I haven't given myself lung cancer or something, but I was in one of these sort of like, I would live somewhere and the leases were always 2 years long, and I would move in and I would live there for 2 years, and then the rent would be too expensive and I would have to move. So I never had like tons of furniture, I had stuff, but I never like fully like moved in and had a home because I knew that I wasn't going to be there for very long. And then they had that grant program, and I moved to Tribeca, and I don't even know if Skylar really remembers this or would say like, yes, that happened, didn't happen, but I have 2 memories of her flyering the neighborhood, not flyering the neighborhood, but just sort of like working the neighborhood. Like, hey, we have a yoga studio. I was just at a restaurant, and I sort of remember her just being like, I don't know, I didn't know, like I didn't practice. I didn't really know, too much about yoga. And I also remember, I did get into doing yoga up at, I don't know what it's even called anymore, or if it's even there, but the Reebok Sports Club or LA Sports Club or whatever that's called on the Upper West Side, and that's next to Central Park. And I would go out in the park and run like that. I grew up an athlete and I got out of organized sports and I was sort of like, what do I do? And anyways, I would go out and run in the park all the time. And I would drop into classes because they had a lot of, in my memory, they were Jivamukti teachers and they were awesome. I mean, some of them I gravitated more towards others, but I also I would go to class late. I didn't really want to chant Om. If we weren't doing a pigeon or ankle to knee, I didn't want to be there. I was there for a very specific, I was jogging and I want to go, stretch my hips type of situation. And anyways, I moved to Tribeca basically when Kula first opened, and there was a sandwich board outside, and I called, I don't know, I got the number somewhere and I called and left a voice message on the answering machine, and Skylar called me back, which is that would never happen now, no studio director is listening to the answering machine and calling you back.
I would say I had a center from 2000 and 2017. And for the first 5 years, I recorded a message every day with the daily schedule.
Amazing.
Remember the old days when we used to do that? Today's schedule is, because we didn't have websites.
I know. And you would
if people called, I would call them back too. Totally.
Yes, totally. So she called me back and was just like, I teach at 6:30 on, Tuesday, Thursday or whatever. And I just went, I just went. And it was so small. I mean, it was, tiny, and the floor was painted blue, and you'd pick your mat up off the floor and the paint would rip off the floor with the mat. And there was 5 people there. And when I went there, I thought, oh, this is yoga. I went to the gym yoga, but I don't know. I wasn't connected to anyone. And like I said, I would sort of not give myself to it fully. So that's how I met her. And it was, like I said, it was so small. So we became really good friends, and everybody knew everybody. I mean, I knew the other teachers, and the, small handful of students that went there knew everyone, and we'd go on a retreat and we'd all be together. And, that was sort of my introduction to Kula and yoga. And I was thinking about this today. I can't say I've never practiced anywhere else, because obviously I go to classes other places, but I never, was part of an Iyengar lineage or an Ashtanga lineage, or practiced somewhere else fully and then found Kula. It's all I've really ever known. Which I remember really good.
I remember when Skylar came on and we talked a little bit. I mean, she had I think very typical influences that I had too, where she was doing Jivamukti kind of style, and then she stayed with Allison for a while, so she was always bringing kind of that more slightly intellectual or alignment kind of element to things. But her whole take was to kind of make it more a little bit irreverent,
Yeah. Well, I remember I have another vivid memory. I went to an Allison West class who I adore. I mean, I totally.
Super smart.
Yeah, super smart. And I love challenging teachers. All these teachers people are they're difficult. I don't like them. I'm like, I like them. There's something about them that I'm I really vibe with them. Yeah. But anyways, I went to her class. This was before she had, or at that time anyway, she didn't have a studio space. Mm-hmm. So she was just sort of floating around renting places. At one point, she actually was teaching this, I thought awesome, but funny hybrid class in the back room of Kula Tribeca. And she would teach an hour of Iyengar, and then Skylar would riff it. I subbed it one time, totally terrified, but you would riff Allison's Iyengar 1 hour into a Kula hour, on the fly, like a vinyasa.
She's a hard act to follow.
And she would take the class. I mean, it was crazy. But anyways, I wanted to go to the source. So I was like, who is this, Allison West person? And I went to a class, I don't know, it was in some space on Broadway. I vaguely remember it being downtown, and I was just like, what is this? I totally didn't get it. I 100%, didn't get it, which I would say I wasn't ready for it, but I also didn't understand how does this translate into a Kula flow class? I just couldn't even make the leap. And I was, just young and dumb, and you're probably not interested, and so on and so forth. But
I was studying with her around that time. It was on Broome Street, just off of Broadway, that she had that space.
So that's where I went.
Yeah. And I remember Skylar and I practicing there alongside each other. And I just think that Allison, what I liked about her was I had been doing kind of flow stuff at Jiva, but I wanted to like be smarter. And she just was so full of information and poses from all these different angles and stuff.
Yeah. Oh, which I love.
She was definitely an acquired taste. I think she, like all of us, has, you know, evolved and changed over the years. But back then, she certainly had a reputation for being pretty tough.
Yeah.
And I liked it like you. I was into it. I wanted her to whip me into shape, and she did.
Yeah. Yeah. And she's, you know, she's awesome.
Well, but it is interesting, though, that you said that that Kula is really where you really came into your yoga, and it's been your home since. And that's a really long, like, not everybody has had a place like that for that long. Yeah.
I mean, it's about to be 2020. I mean, that's 18, 19 years that's, I know, been my home. That's the kind of person I am. I mean, that speaks to, I mean, if it was horrible and I hated it, I would leave, but I'm tried and true. And when I, you know, am in something that I love or believe in, I'm in it. So yes. So, you know, Skylar, and then the other, in my experience, the other main teacher that was there was Allison Novi, who's now Allison Sinatra. And they were like totally yin and yang. I mean, they were best friends. They were like very close, but just, you know, Skylar was very fiery, and the class was always really hard. And, you know, it was like that kind of thing, and like deep, heavy adjustments. And that's what I knew of yoga. But I also knew of Allison, who was, I mean, she wasn't softer, and her class wasn't easy, but it was just a totally different take on what the yoga practice was. And also, you know, per our conversation, which we'll get into, but also used touch and in a very different way, but was also very hands-on. And I appreciated both, and they kind of made a very full, you know, complete package for me. But yes, it's all I ever knew. And I have since then, you know, as any responsible teacher, I would hope, branches out and goes and studies other things and explores other modalities and other practices and other teachers. But yeah, that was sort of it for me for a long time, and continues to be something that I really love and believe in.
And also I think that comes often with having a center, have been sort of doing teacher trainings a bunch over the years. Like, that's been a mainstay of your stuff, right?
I have, but we didn't have a training program I started the program in 2012 or maybe 2013 by the time I had gotten the gigantic manual that we have together. Which means, you know, I started teaching in, I think, 2005. So it was several years, you know, we didn't have a program. And what was happening was we had all these teachers that wanted to teach at Kula, and they would come and, you know, do an audition class, and they, you know, some of them didn't teach great classes, but some taught totally beautiful, wonderful classes, but they were not inside what we would consider the Kula pocket. You know, they were just like of a different, I don't love the word brand, but of a different brand or lineage, if you want to call it that. And so Skylar started a 75-hour advanced teacher training, which was essentially taking all these people that were already teachers and wanted to learn how to teach Kula Flow. Like, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. And teaching them to teach Kula Flow so that they could hopefully teach for us. It's kind of shifted, and now they're, you know, they just go back wherever they live and take what they've taken from the training. But I have really sort of mixed feelings about teacher training, and we started it mostly because I think, I'm probably going to get in trouble for this, but I think a lot of teacher training programs are not great. I think they are ill-prepared teachers to actually teach human bodies. Yeah. And I just think it's a shame. I think it's a shame that somebody pays, you know, $3,000 or whatever they're paying to do this training, and they come out of the training and they don't have the basic tenets of teaching yoga.
Well, I hear that. I mean, I did teacher training at my place too, and I think part of it was because I had to survive financially.
Yeah.
Well, I certainly did my best to give a training that I thought was real value. But I hear what you're saying, that, and I guess I'm curious, how did you how did you guys come up with what makes it a Kula flow? Was it just like what you guys were doing? Did you guys have like a meeting and like write down bullet points of what you think makes it a Kula class?
Well, Skylar and I like work. I mean, and this is something else I want to bring into all of this conversation is that we are always like our training manual is a working document. Our studio is a working, quote unquote document. It's never been like, this is how it is and you do this or you don't work here, or you do this and you don't graduate, or it's not that sort of environment. So, like when we have teacher meetings, for example, it's like an open dialogue, like sure, we direct the studio, but okay, here's the topic. Like, let's talk about it. What do you think? And it's an open discussion and things evolve and, we're not interested in just having this dogmatic thing that we run. So, we have bullet points in our manual that are sort of, these are all the like ways that you could construct a Kula Flow class, but there's also very specific parts, that we reiterate over and over that it's simply a framework, especially as a new teacher, to give you a framework to stand up and try to teach your class, which is terrifying. I mean, I remember my first class.
I hear you. I mean, I'm a big fan of that. I mean, as much as I believe in individualization, when it comes to training teachers, I did the same thing. Like, I taught a very simple program that someone could learn to teach because I wanted them to have something they could really hold on to. Like you're saying, like when you're first starting out, to have structure can be very, very helpful.
Yeah.
It's only if you're not allowed to ever leave the structure. Like you're saying,
right.
if at some point, if you have permission at some point when your confidence is there and your teaching's evolving to then explore, like to not have to stick to it, I think it's great.
Yeah. And we say that and we say it over and over, this is just a framework to help you feel like I have legs to stand on, but it can be this, or it can be this, or it can be something else altogether. Or, you study Qigong, you can bring that in. You're doing martial arts, you can bring that in. It's very loose. And that is what Kula always was. I mean, when I first started going to Kula, there was we've never branded our name or anything like that, but there was no manual, there was no brand. It was lots of different types of teachers, which is why I gave the example of like a Skylar and an Allison. There was things about them that were very similar, but they were also very different as teachers, and they were also both Kula teachers. And that's kind of the job that I give people doing the training is go to all of our teachers, and you'll probably be really confused at first. Jillian teaches this, Nikki teaches this, Kevin Bigger teaches this, Rebecca teaches this. It seems different, but there is something that is a thread to a Kula teacher. And yes, we try to lay some of that out in the manual. But there's room the most important thing to us, I would say, is that you have to be authentic. And I think that's something that is very clear in Kula teachers is that it's not that they're no bullshit, but they're super straight up. I mean, there's no weird yoga voice. If you like to chant, you do. If you don't, you'll never do it. If you want to give a Dharma talk, do. We're never going to make you. It's just who you are. And I think that resonates with students if you like what the teacher's serving. And if you don't, then you don't.
I get it totally, because I did also have my training because at some point I wanted the classes to have a cohesion to them. Mm-hmm. And there was a few times where I had teachers who taught there who didn't train with me, but it was because they would come to my class and they would get what I was doing as a teacher. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that would be really clear just from talking to them. Like, yes. If someone could like sit with me after class and just hang out and talk to me about what I was doing and what they're doing and how,
absolutely.
I could get a sense of, I get it. This person could totally fit in here, even though they don't teach what I teach. Exactly.
Yes. And that was what Kula used to be more of, because we didn't have a training program. And, I have mixed feelings about it. It's my sort of personal pet project. It's the first thing that I really tried to put into play at Kula, not on my own, but, that I've really sort of babied and fostered. And I love it. And it's my favorite time of year, and I do absolutely love it. And, I also think that someone who's just following the manual and doing the Kula Flow format without anything else personality-wise or whatever is totally boring. I mean, it's just
I know.
not interesting.
Here's what I would say is that like when people who, I don't know, were practicing with me for a while. And then at a certain point, it makes sense that they really want to get into learning deeper and potentially they have like a dream of maybe teaching someday or something.
Right.
And that person and I would gauge in training. It would be really great because it would be like even more because it wasn't just drop-in classes, but like it was this commitment they were making to study and I would meet that commitment.
Yes.
But there was also this element of like a whole, like, I don't know, amount of people who would show up to train just to do a training. And like, you couldn't really turn them away.
Well, so this is interesting. So we don't have large trainings. I mean, we have years where, interestingly enough, after Trump was elected president, we had a very large, like all these people signed up after the November election, past the early bird special, which never happens. Everybody signs up early. But a bunch of people I felt were like, oh my God, the world's ending, sign up for teacher training. And this year we happen to have a large group. And then we have other years where we have, we make like a little bit of money, but kind of break even. And, we have like, I don't know, 10 or 15 people. And we've never even had 30 people. We've never done it twice a year. We do it one time a year. Our average is probably 17, 20 people, something like that. And part of that I would say, and I took some of this from my own experience at teacher training. But part of it is you have to have a practice at Kula. If you email me and say, I want to do teacher training, the first thing I do is look in my body. If you've never been there, it's like, great, start coming to the studio, introduce yourself. We'll have a conversation at some point. So anyways, we put up not barriers, but just sort of, you've got to practice there. You have to come meet with me. You have to fill out a fairly lengthy application. And I think it turns enough people away that we don't end up with just like a random, like, oh, I want to do a teacher training. And, it's not a foolproof system, but for the most part, I feel like we end up with really great people.
No, I did the same thing. I almost try to like discourage people from doing it,
Yeah, I know.
Because you wanted it, because for you as the person who's leading it, it's not really like the right place for them to be. You don't want them there because it messes up the whole group. It doesn't make for a good training.
Totally. And the reality is, when we first started doing it, well, let me back up one second. When we first started doing it, we did it because I wanted to start people from the ground up. We were seeing all these people that had done 200 hours and didn't have the foundation. So we call our training Kula Flow Foundations, and it's very foundational, and that's the whole point. And that was our point, was to start them from the ground up and hopefully train people that could teach for us. That was sort of the original, thing that we wanted to do.
Staff up. You staffed up.
Yeah. Instead of them having and gone to do this other training and then having to do like our advanced training and spending more money and, so on and so forth. But, I don't know where I was going with this, but.
Well, what I was going to go is something you said at the very beginning, because you took a moment right at the beginning when we first got to teacher training and you like took a deep breath and then you said, I've got reservations that people have to pay $3,000. And that is something I really feel too. And I haven't done a teacher training in a while. I don't have a center right now. I'm just in the studio and I've done one-to-one like mentor training with people. But there's a thing about it where if you're being honest with yourself, not that you're not doing everything you can. I'm sure it's a fantastic program and a lot of great teachers come out of Kula. But if you're being honest with yourself, that it's really it's not really how it happens. To put it into hours and to try to standardize it, that when it really is like you met Skylar, you developed this relationship to her, like, you learned from her over time, from practicing with her and talking with her, and you learned everything that you probably do in the training now. But you didn't learn it in the same way that you're teaching it to people, because it wasn't this 200-hour thing. It was just you and Skylar hanging out and practicing. Right,
which is why I also... I'm going to stick my foot in my mouth, but I have all of these new regulations or standardization or whatever came out with the Yoga Alliance. And I'm so conflicted and have real problems with so much of it because, for example, I mean, I think that our training, of course, and I tell everybody this, everyone's going to say this, but I think our training is top notch. It's awesome. You know, you like learn so much. It's so great. But we also have, you know, what I think was so beautiful about Kula, as I mentioned, was that we had all of these older, seasoned teachers that's what Kula was. It was a coming together of this community of teachers that we would all take each other's classes and riff off of one another. And that's how I schedule the training, is that we have, you know, Alex comes and teaches, Allison teaches. I mean, we have all of these old school Kula teachers come back, and, you know, that no longer is acceptable for the Yoga Alliance. Like I'm supposed to teach 150 of the 200 hours in the studio, right. You know, that sort of thing. And I don't know. I mean, it's all just coming about, and, you know, I know there's a lot of talk about it, but I think that there is something, if I looked at my training program or Kula's training program and said, you know, I think that there's really something to be said for studying with these incredible teachers who have been teaching for, you know, 15 to 40 years. That's where the real nectar is at to me. And listening to me sit there for 150 hours to, you know, the same voice saying these things, I don't agree that makes a good teacher.
I know. And see, in the same way that we were talking about how you have a structure, but you don't have to like have it be like a dogma.
Right.
That's sort of the problem. Like, I think a lot of us, we embraced the 200 hours because that's what this sort of industry sort of came up with or something. I don't know.
Right.
It emerged, right? So we all just said, okay, we're doing 200 hours now.
Right.
And we did our best with that format. We really made good trainings. A lot of people, I mean, sure, there's a lot of bad trainings, but there's people out there who are really good trainings, I'm sure.
Totally. And yes, we all adopted it. And, you know, I don't know. I mean, before that though, you know, for example, like Alex or even some of our other teachers never got a 200 hour. I mean, they were just sort of then grandfathered in, and that wasn't the way it was. And now that is the way it is. And, I know what I was going to say. The students still really care though, is my perception. You know, they want it to be YA certified.
Because that's what people know now. Because that's
right.
That's the convention that it exists.
Correct. So then, you know, so in our training, I, in many areas, one being, you know, we're going to get uncertified by the Yoga Alliance, but
no, you know, they're not. Although I have a feeling people there listen to this just to say that I think you should speak freely, because I think they want to hear real stuff, you know?
I'll speak freely. I mean, when we do, you know, the business of yoga section, and I'm like, hey guys, I don't, you know, be part of the Yoga Alliance if you want, or sign up for a year, see what it does for you, or don't, and then decide, you know, so on and so forth. But no one, and of course this depends on where you're teaching, but no one's ever asked me to see my certificate. I mean, no one has ever said, are you Yoga Alliance certified, or what's your number, or, you know, any of that.
Yeah.
And I can just kind of see the faces fall in the room, you know, sort of, well, what did I pay for? This is what I paid for.
I had an alum reach out to me recently. And she was reaching out because she was getting a job teaching, and they were asking her for some stuff. And then I was like going back and forth with her. And what they were asking for was if she had a liability insurance policy. And I was like, well, you don't actually need to be registered for that.
Right. No,
like, you can, anybody can go get a liability insurance policy for being a yoga teacher without showing anything.
Absolutely. And I think that's just part of, and it is part of what I also want to speak about is educating the student base, you know, and that's just a re-education. Whether your opinion is, I want to re-educate them in a way that, you know, Yoga Alliance, for example, has changed their standards and they're doing this thing, or if your choice is to say, I don't really believe in it and we're not going to do that anymore and we're doing this thing.
Well, this maybe is a good place to transition to sort of, you know, initial impetus for this conversation, because, you know, this idea of the standards and, you know, what I just said, a lot of people are going to be nervous about that and say, that's why we should be regulating yoga teachers, you know? And I do think that, you know, as you said, one of the aspects of Kula is, you know, there's a lot of hands-on often.
Yeah. I mean, it's shifted. I'll be totally honest. I mean, And you saw this going back to our, the first thing you asked me, do you remember that panel?
That panel, yes.
I totally
and just for
remember
everybody listening, that panel was specifically on adjustments.
And it was me and Allison West and Eddie Stern.
Yes.
And Leslie Kaminoff.
Yes.
And I think
one
maybe,
she was just on recently. What's her name? She's at Ben and Bloom now.
Amy? No.
Her name's eluding me. Doesn't matter. Continue. Okay. You were on the panel, I remember.
I was on the panel, and in retrospect, I'm like, I was the person asked to come because I was going to be like, yeah, we don't ask anyone. We just, give everybody adjustments. So I look back at that, and I really did feel that way. And I see two things, a younger version of myself, of course, that's standing up there with like Eddie Stern and Allison West. And, definitely like, I didn't say, I'm not a person that gets up on a pulpit and has, I am doing this podcast, but I had to think long and hard about it.
I get it. It was a tough panel to be on. I hear you. I've been on panels, and there was a bunch of big heavy hitters on there.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of me that looks and says like, I see my younger self in what I said or how I reacted. And, I also look at the culture of the world of what's happening. And I think, we all live in the context of a society and of the world and what's happening. That doesn't mean you have to follow it or not follow it, but I think you have to plug into it and just, kind of gauge, talk to other people. And you've talked about this a lot on your podcast. I talk to the youngsters, as Alex and when I would call them. I want to know, cause it's very clear what many of them think. And then, if I talk to, I'll just use Skylar because we've already talked about her and we speak all the time, but it's much more just like, what do you mean? Is this an issue? Really? It's very, there's a big divide, it's very, and like I said, I'm sort of in the middle of that. I haven't been around.
You were probably one of the younger people on that panel, as you were saying.
Oh, totally.
But I don't remember, maybe you remember different. I don't remember there being any real talk about consent cards or sexual abuse at that panel 5 years ago.
There wasn't. Because it wasn't being talked about. And obviously it was an issue. It was happening.
It was happening. That's all I'm saying, but it was not being talked about.
Yeah. And it definitely wasn't being talked about. And I look at that as sort of, like I said, I've never been a part of the Ashtanga community. I was never really a part of the Iyengar community. And even though now I study with Iyengar teachers, Skylar and Allison were definitely never abusing me. I just kind of, it wasn't in my world. Like I actually didn't know that was happening. And now it's all coming out and I'm very much, abreast of it. And Alex, of course, sends me things all the time to read and I'm interested and I want to be part of the conversation. And it's a little, it's not foreign to me, but I just feel, I look at that and I'm like, wow, this stuff is really happening. And I personally don't think, knock on wood, but that's been a part of Bula. But, anyways, I'm shifting and, like, for example, our training starts in January and a few weeks ago, I sent our manual off to the printers to be printed. And like I said, it's a working document. I definitely edited, I look back at sort of, what did I say about adjustments? And it was, this very myopic view of me, thinking adjustments are awesome and everybody else should love them too. And, and not that harsh, but I edit it and I change it. And I still 100% believe in intelligent touch. And we can talk more about that. But
well, I will say, just 2 days ago, I had this weekly teachers class and like a video call where these teachers from all over the world had these conversations. We've been talking about the podcast that I did with Catherine and Alex and all these issues and talking about touch and what we're doing as teachers and whatever.
Yep.
And then one of those teachers came to my class and brought her mom with her 2 days ago.
Okay.
And so they're doing this thing and I have two ways I can teach this one aspect of how your breath might facilitate movement in this pose. Trying to make the pose happen, you're letting your breath facilitate it more. So There's a way I can teach that, like with a verbal articulation. I studied with Allison West. Of all the people I've ever known, Allison's probably the most verbally articulate yoga teacher you'll ever meet in your lifetime.
Yeah.
So I feel pretty well equipped to teach with words. But she didn't really seem, I don't know where her head was. You don't know what's going on, but I could kind of tell when someone's getting it or when it's sort of landing with that person or when it's not.
And wait, let me ask you, is this the daughter or the mom?
The mom.
Okay.
The daughter's been coming to my class and she knows what I'm teaching, but her mom wasn't really getting it.
Yep.
So I knew, I had a really good hunch that if I went over to her mom and I put my hands on her back, that just that alone, along with the words, she would likely have it would land with her more.
Right.
And I had this moment where I had to like go to her daughter and say, I'm going to ask your mom if I could touch her. You know what I mean? Like,
oh my God.
This whole moment. And she kind of laughed. And then I went to her mom and her mom didn't mind. You know, like you said, the older generation, they don't have the same conversations or issues around it necessarily. She was fine. She didn't care. She was like, yeah, sure, please.
Yeah.
So I put my hands on her back and sure enough, she totally, and her daughter's watching it. And
you're under the microscope.
She sees she's a teacher like me. She sees what I see and she sees her mom get it from the touch.
Yeah.
From the touch. And the thing that she did not get from the word, she got from the touch.
But granted,
so
beautiful to me.
It is. Now, but what I will say is this, it was 4 people in class.
Right.
I definitely asked her. I made a whole thing of it. You know what I mean? Like there was a whole bunch of stuff that was also happening. And the nature of that touch was not at all about opening a pose for someone or opening a pose for somebody or even trying to get them into a pose. It was really just about an experience of breath in the pose. And so there are differences. There's differences in terms of the nature of touch.
Totally. And I when I was just editing our manual, I was reading it and I've written about that. And there's, there are heavier manual adjustments. There's breath-based adjustments. There's, one finger adjustments. There's lots of different kinds of touch for sure. I guess and we can talk about, sort of consent cards and all of that stuff, but my fear is that touch is going to get canceled. And it's just sort of, okay, these bad things have happened from women too, but mostly from men and these other lineages. And suddenly, it's this puritanical culture where no one's touching anybody. And I
hear that we're all told.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.